Planet Reddit, today's story is...
My mother-in-law demanded that I give my house to her daughter the day before my husband's funeral. She never imagined what would happen when my father-in-law discovered her plan. Losing my husband was like losing a vital part of me. Only after his passing did I realize how much I had depended on his presence in my life. We had built 7 years of marriage together, creating a home and sharing dreams for a future that now seemed shattered. The days following his death passed by in a haze of people offering their condolences, homemade meals brought over by neighbors, and endless paperwork. The pain enveloped me like a thick fog that made it difficult to breathe, turning even the simplest tasks into real challenges. In the midst of all this emotional chaos, my mother-in-law Elaine decided it was the perfect time to have an important conversation. She approached me in the kitchen the day before the funeral. Her tone sounded friendly on the surface, but I knew Elaine too well not to perceive that there was always an ulterior motive behind her sweet words. She began by saying that she wanted to talk about what was best for the family now that her son was no longer with us. Her words hit me like an unexpected slap in the face. My husband had been my whole world, and now she was talking about him as if he were a chess piece that she could move around as she saw fit. Elaine went on to explain that her daughter Sarah was struggling financially as a single mother of 4 children. According to her, the small apartment where Sarah lived was not a suitable place to raise a family. And then came the most painful part. Since I had no children and no family to live for, her exact words, it made sense that I should leave the house. I stared at her, too shocked to respond. Unaware of my shock, Elaine continued talking, painting a picture of Sarah and her children playing in the yard of my house, filling it with laughter and joy. According to her, this was exactly what my husband would have wanted. Her audacity left me completely stunned. This was not just any property. It was our home. My husband and I had saved for years to be able to buy it, putting our heart into every detail. He had never even remotely mentioned the idea of giving our house to Sarah or anyone else. I replied to Elaine as calmly as I could, telling her that the house would stay with me. Her expression changed instantly. She accused me of being selfish, of clinging to something that no longer mattered. She even suggested that I was disrespecting my husband's memory by not helping his sister. I couldn't contain myself any longer. With a trembling voice, I asked her to leave the kitchen and let me process my grief in peace. She huffed but left, muttering something under her breath about my supposed lack of family values. As soon as she left, I sat down trying to regain my composure. The audacity of that woman was unbelievable. Later that night, my father-in-law Charles approached me. He had noticed the tension and asked me if everything was all right. I hesitated to reply, not wanting to create more drama just before the funeral. Charles had always been the calmer and more reasonable of the two, and you didn't want to get him involved in Elaine's machinations. His concern seemed genuine, but I told him it was nothing to worry about. He nodded with a frown, as if he didn't quite believe me, but didn't press the matter further. That night, lying in bed, Elaine's words were still ringing in my head. The sheer presumption of her demand outraged me. She had acted as if my grief, my home and my life were of no importance. Everything revolved around Sarah and her children. The following morning, I recalled something specific that Elaine had mentioned during our conversation. She had stated that Sarah's apartment was not suitable for her children. But I knew perfectly well that Sarah's financial problems were not due to the size of her home, but to her lack of responsibility. Sarah had always depended on others to solve her problems. Her 4 children had 3 different fathers, none of whom participated in their lives. She refused to hold down a steady job, constantly jumping from one job to another while depending on Elaine and Charles to bail her out financially. And now Elaine wanted me to join the list of people who facilitated her lifestyle by giving her my house. I couldn't stop thinking about how Elaine had tried to manipulate me using guilt. She had told me that, as I didn't have children, I couldn't understand the sacrifices a mother makes for her children. It was the same condescending tone she had used throughout my marriage, always implying that I wasn't enough because my husband and I hadn't had children. When I made it clear to her that the house was mine and that I wasn't going to give it up, she had the audacity to act as if I was the irrational one. She claimed that I was being cruel and that I didn't care about the welfare of Sarah's children. I wondered if Elaine had even considered what her son would have thought of all this. My husband had always been extremely protective of me, always putting our needs above everything else. He would have been furious if he had known that his mother was trying to throw me out of our home. Later that day, while going through some of my husband's belongings, Elaine showed up again. This time, she didn't even bother with formalities. She demanded to know why I was refusing to help Sarah. I couldn't contain my frustration any longer. I told her firmly that Sarah's problems were not my responsibility and that my husband would never have wanted me to give up our home. I reminded her that this house was as much mine as it was his, and that I wouldn't let anyone take it away from me. Elaine's face contorted with anger. She said I was being cruel and ungrateful, that I didn't deserve the family I had married into. Her words hurt me deeply, but I stood my ground. I replied that if she wanted to help Sarah so much, she could offer her her own home instead of trying to take mine away from me. Elaine stormed out, slamming the door behind her. That night, Charles approached me again, his expression much more serious this time. He asked me if Elaine had said anything to upset me. After hesitating for a moment, I decided to be completely honest. I told him all about Elaine's demands, her insults, and her attempts to manipulate me using guilt. Charles listened in silence, his face darkening with each word I uttered. When I finished, he let out a long sigh and assured me that he would take care of the matter. For the first time since my husband's death, I felt a small glimmer of relief. At least someone was on my side, although I knew this was not the end. Elaine was not the type of person to easily accept defeat, and I sensed that her next move would be even more outrageous. The day of the funeral arrived. I felt completely overwhelmed by the pain and the weight of everything Elaine had already put me through. We had delayed the ceremony a little so that the whole family could attend. I was determined to focus on honoring my husband's memory and supporting those who had loved him, but Elaine had other plans. From the moment she arrived, dressed completely in black but with an air of superiority, she made it clear that she sought the spotlight. She moved around the room greeting guests with an exaggerated display of grief, her voice rising above the murmurs of condolences, as if she were the only person who was truly in mourning. It wasn't long before I heard her dropping hints about her plans to anyone who would listen. She explained how Sarah and her children needed a stable home and how it was the family's responsibility to look after each other. At first I thought maybe she was being overly sensitive, but then I caught her talking directly to one of my husband's cousins. Elaine was telling her that I was not handling the situation well and that I was too lost in my grief to see things clearly. She said it was a shame that I was not willing to step aside and do what her son would have wanted, adding that Sarah and her children were already eager to make a fresh start. I was transfixed, my heart beating furiously. Not only was she planning to take my house away from me, but she was also portraying me as the villain in this story. I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. It wasn't just about me. It was about protecting my husband's memory from his mother's selfish manipulation. I needed an ally, and there was only one person who could put Elaine in her place, Charles. I found him standing quietly near the back of the room, greeting some guests with his usual calm. I took him aside and told him we needed to talk privately. Charles looked at me with concern but agreed, leading me to a secluded corner. I didn't beat around the bush. I told him that Elaine was tarnishing my husband's memory by using Sarah and her children as an excuse, and that she was now discussing her plans with the guests at the funeral. Charles's face darkened as I spoke. I could see the tension building in his jaw. His lips tightened into a tense line. When I finished, he slowly shook his head, his voice low but firm. He asked me if Elaine had really said all that. I assured him that she wouldn't lie about something so serious, especially on a day like that. Without saying another word, he turned and walked straight towards Elaine, who was chatting with a group of guests. I followed him at a distance, unsure of what would happen next. When Charles reached Elaine, his voice was firm and loud enough for others to hear. He asked her directly if it was true that she had been pressuring me to leave my house, and if she had been discussing her plans with other people during the funeral. Elaine visibly paled and stammered something about misunderstandings and trying to do what was best for the family, but Charles did not accept her excuses. He told her that this was neither the time nor the place for such behavior, and that her actions were not only inappropriate but deeply disrespectful to the memory of her son. The confrontation drew the attention of several guests, and the room fell silent as everyone turned to watch. Elaine's voice became shrill as she tried to defend herself, claiming that I had been selfish and uncooperative, and that she had only the welfare of her grandchildren in mind. Charles interrupted her, raising his voice just enough to silence her. He told her that her presumption had gone too far, and that she had crossed a line by trying to manipulate a grieving widow. He declared that this behavior was shameful and that he would not tolerate it any longer. The guests nearby murmured in support, and I could see sympathy in their eyes when they looked at me. Elaine, on the other hand, looked furious and humiliated. She muttered something under her breath and stormed out of the room, leaving Charles shaking his head in frustration. Update 1. After the confrontation, the atmosphere at the funeral changed noticeably. The guests who had witnessed the argument began to offer me their support, expressing their disapproval of Elaine's behavior. Some of her own relatives even approached me to apologize on her behalf, saying they couldn't believe how far she had gone. I appreciated their kind words, but I couldn't shake the tension in the air. Elaine had been publicly humiliated, but I knew she wasn't the type of person to give up easily. Later that night, when all the guests had left and the house was silent once again, Charles came over to me. He looked exhausted. The weight of the day was clearly visible on his face. He apologized for Elaine's actions, saying that he hadn't realized how far she had gone with her demands. He confessed to me that he felt ashamed of her behavior and promised me that he would do everything possible to remedy the situation. He assured me that I didn't have to worry about losing my house and that he would personally take care of controlling Elaine. His words comforted me, but I still felt cautious. Elaine was not someone who could be reasoned with easily. True to her nature, she did not stay quiet for long. The next morning, I received a text message from her accusing me of turning Charles against her and humiliating her in front of the whole family. She claimed that I had exaggerated things and that I was the one being selfish. I did not reply. There was no point in interacting with her when she was in that state. Instead, I concentrated on taking small steps towards finding some normality in my life. Over the next few days, news of Elaine's behavior spread throughout the family. Several relatives called me to see how I was doing, offering their support and sharing their own frustrations with Elaine's attitude. It became clear that this was not the first time she had acted like this, but on this occasion she had crossed an unacceptable line. As for Sarah and her children, their plans to move into my house quickly fell apart. Without Elaine pushing her agenda, there was no way Sarah could justify trying to take over my home. From what I heard, Sarah was furious with her mother for ruining her plans. But I didn't let that affect me. The most important thing was that I had stood firm and protected the home that my husband and I had built together. Elaine's schemes had failed, and although I knew there would probably be more drama in the future, I felt stronger knowing that I was not alone in this fight. Charles, true to his word, began to make changes to his home to ensure that Elaine would not do something similar again. I didn't know exactly what those changes would be, but it was clear to me that he was determined to make her accountable for her actions. Update 2. The days following the funeral passed in a haze of exhaustion, resentment, and an overwhelming feeling of loneliness. I had spent years building a life with my husband, creating a home that I thought was ours alone. I never imagined that I would find myself sitting in it completely alone, with his mother trying to take him away from me so easily. The audacity, the cruelty of her actions. And yet, I still couldn't fully take it in. I kept waiting for it all to feel real, but it didn't. It just didn't feel real yet. I remember one night, a couple of days after the funeral, when it all suddenly hit me. The pain, the anger, the betrayal. It all came crashing down on me like an unbearable weight on my chest. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel it completely. I hadn't really cried until then. The days had been consumed by the need to keep everything under control, dealing with the practicalities, the endless visitors, and then my mother-in-law's plans. I had kept my defenses up, but that night, sitting alone on the sofa, I finally broke down. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of pain, guilt, and exhaustion. There were no more distractions, no more chores to do, no more people around to please. Just me, alone with all the emotions I had been avoiding. I couldn't stop the tears. I wasn't just crying for him anymore. I was crying for everything I had lost. For the life we would never get to live, for the future we would never get to share. I was crying for the dreams I had given up on, for the parts of me I had buried so deep in the effort to keep things going, to keep everyone happy. But it was more than just pain. It was the realization that despite everything I had given, everything I had sacrificed for our family, it was never enough. It would never be enough. Not for my mother-in-law, not for anyone. I had worked so hard to make everything perfect, to keep the peace, to preserve some sense of family unity. And yet it wasn't enough. I wasn't enough. I had lost my husband. And now I was being forced to lose everything I had left. My home, my place, my dignity. I could hear my mother-in-law's voice in my head, telling me that I no longer had a family, nowhere to belong, no reason to stay. Her words echoed over and over again, hurting more deeply with each repetition. I listened to her constantly, wondering if perhaps there was some truth in what she was saying. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I had allowed myself to become too attached. Maybe I should have known from the start that I would never really belong to that family. I had married their son, but maybe I was always just a stranger to them. I was shaking uncontrollably. The tears wouldn't stop. I remember asking myself between sobs, why does it hurt so much? Why do I feel as if everything is falling apart? And then, in the midst of it all, I suddenly felt ashamed. Ashamed for allowing myself to feel so broken, for being so weak. I should have been stronger. I should have been able to handle it better. It should have been me who held everything together, who preserved the peace, who made sure that no one else got hurt, but instead I was falling apart. I was alone. I felt terribly alone. And I remember that at that moment something finally broke inside me. It was as if I had been holding myself together with tiny threads for so long, and now they had all broken. There were no more pretensions, no more need to show strength. I didn't have to be strong for anyone else. I could just feel the weight of it all, every second of every year that had led to this moment. I collapsed on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. And I realized then that this wasn't just about the house. It was about the life I had lost. It was about the dreams that would never come true, the future that would never come to be. I was mourning not only the loss of my husband, but everything that came with him, his love, his warmth, his laughter. It was about betrayal, not only of my mother-in-law, but of life itself. And I had no idea what to do next. I didn't know how to move forward. I didn't know how to heal, but one thing became clear in that moment. I had to. I couldn't stay trapped here. Trapped in pain, controlled by it. I had to find a way to move forward. I had to survive this. I had to honor my husband's memory in a way that didn't allow her to win. But first I had to allow myself to feel it all. I couldn't keep pretending that I was okay. I couldn't keep suppressing all my emotions. It wasn't okay. I was shattered, but that was okay. I just had to take things one step at a time. Update 3. Yes, I feel better now. I can't thank you enough for your support. It means a lot to me in my current situation. Well, after the fiasco at the funeral, Elaine tried to regain some control over the situation. It wasn't long before she started contacting the extended family, telling her side of the story. She claimed that I had exaggerated everything, and that Charles had been too harsh on her after the scene at the funeral. She presented herself as a misunderstood matriarch who was only trying to do what was best for everyone. At first, some members of the family seemed to believe her. They were curious about her sudden outburst and wondered if perhaps there were more details to the story. But as more information emerged, especially from people who had witnessed the confrontation at the funeral, Elaine's narrative quickly lost credibility. She tried to argue that Sarah's situation as a single mother of 4 made her more deserving of the house. She emphasized that families should support each other and that I had no children or close relatives who needed the space. According to her, I was being selfish by clinging to a home that could benefit Sarah and her needs more. What she did not consider was the silent support I had gained in the days following the funeral. Charles, my greatest ally, did not hesitate to correct Elaine's falsehoods. When her justifications reached his ears, he responded with a firm public denunciation. Charles told anyone willing to listen that Elaine's actions had been motivated by presumption, not family loyalty. He reminded them that their son, my husband, had worked hard to secure our home together, and that his wishes never included uprooting me for someone else's convenience. Charles's direct honesty left little room for Elaine to weave her web of half-truths. Even so, she did not give up easily. She confronted Charles at his house, defending her position in a desperate attempt to save her plans. She insisted that I was manipulating him that I was using my pain as a shield to divert attention from his reasonable suggestions. Charles did not raise his voice, but his words were more forceful than ever. He told her that she had shamed herself and the whole family. He said he would not allow her to destroy his relationship with me, especially not with dishonest plans that dishonored the memory of his son. The final blow came when Charles made an unexpected announcement later that week. He had decided to downsize and move into a smaller apartment with Elaine. Their large house, which had been the center of so many family gatherings over the years, would be put up for sale. Charles presented this as a practical decision, mentioning the cost of maintaining a large property now that it was just the two of them. But everyone understood the truth. By moving, he was effectively limiting Elaine's ability to orchestrate power plays like the one she had attempted with me. The announcement caused shockwaves throughout the family. Elaine was completely taken aback. She was in a state of shock and disbelief. For the first time, she was lost for words. Her protests about how much she loved their home and how unfair this decision was fell on deaf ears. The change in the family dynamic was evident. Charles was taking control, and Elaine was losing her influence over the family narrative that she had manipulated for so long. Update 4. As the dust settled, Elaine began to realize the damage she had done to her reputation. News of her behavior had spread beyond the family circle. People began to look at her differently. Some whispered about how she had tried to drive her daughter-in-law into mourning from her own home. Others openly questioned her character, wondering how a mother could behave so callously after the loss of her own child. She tried to change her strategy, focusing on Sarah and her children as a way of rebuilding her image. She began to organize small family gatherings in her new apartment, hoping to gain sympathy for Sarah's difficulties. But the family's patience with Elaine had run out. Few attended her events, and those who did not hesitate to express their disappointment with her recent actions. Meanwhile, I was overwhelmed by the support I received from the extended family itself and from the community. People I hadn't spoken to in years got in touch to offer words of encouragement. They shared their own experiences of dealing with manipulative relatives. They congratulated me for standing my ground and handling the situation with dignity, even when Elaine had tried to portray me as the villain. Sarah, meanwhile, seemed resentful of me for getting in the way of her opportunity. She avoided any direct contact, but I heard that she was having difficulty adjusting to life without the victory she had been promised. Despite the chaos, I began to feel a sense of closure. Charles's decision to sell his house and move into an apartment had symbolic value. It was a tangible change, a sign that the family was no longer willing to tolerate Elaine's toxic behavior. For her, the smaller apartment was a constant reminder of her miscalculation. She had hoped to gain more control over the family by putting pressure on me, but instead she had lost her privileged position in her home. As for me, I concentrated on moving on with my life. My house, once the center of their schemes, became my sanctuary once again. I filled it with mementos of my husband, reminders of the life we had built together. Charles's constant support was still a comforting presence, and for that I felt deeply grateful. He had chosen to honor his son's memory by standing up for what was right, even when it meant turning his own life upside down. The road to recovery was not over, but I felt at peace. Elaine's regrets were something she would have to bear on her own, and I had no intention of allowing her bitterness to overshadow the life I was rebuilding. Update 5. My evening was interrupted by a gentle knock at the door. It was my father-in-law, Charles, standing in his well-worn coat, looking both tired and determined. His usually reserved and calm face now bore a weight that spoke volumes. He asked if he could come in, his voice gentle but with an air of urgency. I couldn't help but notice the exhaustion in his eyes. It had been growing for days, a weight that seemed to drag him down with every passing hour. After everything that had happened, I had expected him to have retreated to his own space, to perhaps seek solace in the tranquility of his home, but instead, there he was in front of me, as if the weight of it all had finally forced him to speak. He took a deep breath, staring at the floor for a long moment before finally breaking the silence. He said he'd had enough. There was an intensity in his words that surprised me. The calm he'd always displayed seemed to have been hiding something deeper beneath the surface. He was tired of everything, tired of her, tired of the whole situation. He had allowed Elaine to manipulate him for years and admitted to having ignored her methods for too long. But now, after everything that had happened, after losing his son, he could no longer remain silent. Charles looked me straight in the eye, as if seeking understanding. He said he was finished with her, that he could not bear to look at her anymore. She had not mourned her son. She had not given him space to process his own grief. Instead, she had been too busy pushing her own agenda. My father-in-law confessed that he simply could not stay silent any longer, not when everything was falling apart around him. My heart quickened as I understood the weight of his words. Charles was not only tired, he was also deeply hurt. He had seen his wife's cruelty manifest itself for years, and now she had reached her breaking point. He told me that he was ready to make a significant change in his life. He went on to explain that he could no longer continue to live like this, keeping silent just to maintain a superficial peace, not when she behaved in such a selfish way. And then, in a calm but firm voice, he told me that he had decided to move out for good. He had already been thinking about this decision for several days, and now he was ready to act. Given that his wife seemed so determined to help her irresponsible daughter, he could perfectly well stay in the small apartment where they were temporarily living. Charles needed to leave. The idea sounded as unexpected as it did comforting. At last someone was standing up to Elaine directly. Someone was making a decision based on principles and not manipulated by guilt or pressure. I was deeply glad that he had decided to stop following the rules imposed by her. My father-in-law paused as he watched me. His eyes seemed to be pleading for some kind of confirmation, as if he needed me to understand that he wasn't simply abandoning her for no reason. He was finally standing up for what was right, what she truly deserved for her actions. He told me that he had already confronted Elaine directly. He had told her very clearly that she seemed to lack any compassion, that she was not even properly grieving for her own son, and yet she had the audacity to demand that I leave my home. Charles explained to me that he had told her how disgusted he felt by her behavior and how he could no longer remain silent in the face of such a situation. I could sense the emotion in his voice as he recounted this confrontation. He told me that Elaine had angrily shouted at him, accusing him of abandoning her and of taking my side instead of supporting his own family, but my father-in-law remained firm in his position, undaunted. It was then that I understood how much Charles had changed in such a short time. This was not the same man who had silently endured Elaine's behavior for years. Now he was someone who had finally found his voice, a person who had recognized the toxicity around him and was no longer willing to tolerate it. Charles got up slowly, his gaze still fixed on me. His presence seemed to be charged with the weight of his words and decisions. He told me that he deeply regretted everything Elaine had put me through. He assured me that he would do everything possible to remedy the situation and that he would not allow her to destroy what little was left of our family.